The crisp mountain air filled Arjun's lungs. He inhaled deeply, savoring the scent of pine and damp earth. Beside him, Priya laughed, her cheeks flushed with the chill. They had arrived at their anniversary getaway, a quaint cottage nestled amidst the towering deodars of Manali. The cottage, with its sloping roof and stone chimney, looked like something out of a fairy tale. Arjun squeezed Priya's hand. "Happy anniversary, love," he whispered, his eyes reflecting the snow-capped peaks in the distance. She smiled back, her eyes sparkling. This was their sanctuary, a place to escape the city's cacophony and reconnect with each other. As evening descended, casting long shadows across the valley, they lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. The flames crackled, filling the room with a warm glow. The silence was broken only by the wind whistling through the trees outside, a lonely, haunting sound. Priya shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arjun chuckled, attributing her unease to the solitude, but deep down, a flicker of unease stirred within him too. The next day dawned bright and clear. Sunlight streamed through the windows, chasing away the previous night's shadows. They decided to explore the nearby woods, their laughter echoing through the silent trees. As they walked, Arjun noticed Priya growing quiet. Her gaze darted around nervously, as if she sensed unseen eyes upon them. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern furrowing his brow. Priya hesitated, then pointed to a thicket of trees. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Arjun listened intently. A faint humming sound reached his ears like a voice carried on the wind. They cautiously approached the thicket, the humming growing louder, but as they drew closer, it abruptly stopped. All that remained was the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. Priya was visibly shaken. Arjun, though skeptical, couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. That night, sleep eluded them. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind sent shivers down their spines. Just when Arjun was drifting off, he heard it again, the humming, this time closer, seemingly right outside their bedroom window. He sat bolt upright, his heart pounding in his chest. The next morning, determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences, Arjun suggested a trip to the nearby village. Perhaps the locals knew something about the cottage and its history. Priya, though hesitant to leave the relative safety of daylight, agreed. The village was a cluster of houses nestled in the valley. An old woman, her face etched with wrinkles, sat outside a small shop, sorting through a basket of herbs. Arjun approached her, his voice respectful. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began. "We're staying at the cottage up the hill. We were hoping you could tell us a little about its past." The woman looked up, her eyes sharp and piercing. "The cottage?" she repeated, her voice raspy. "Many stories are told about that place. Some say it's cursed." Priya gasped, but Arjun pressed on, eager for answers. The old woman, with a sigh, began to recount a tale of love, betrayal, and a broken heart. It was the story of a young woman left at the altar by her lover who had taken her own life within the cottage walls. Her spirit, unable to find peace, was said to haunt the cottage to this day. "Some say she can still be heard," the old woman continued, her voice a low murmur, singing her mournful songs on the wind. Arjun felt a chill run down his spine. The humming he had heard, it was her voice, the spirit of the heartbroken woman. The old woman looked at them, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and warning. "Be careful, young ones," she said. "Some wounds even time cannot heal." Arjun and Priya thanked the old woman and left the village, their hearts heavy with the weight of the story they had heard. As they walked back towards the cottage, the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the path. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of humming. Priya clung to Arjun's arm, her eyes wide with fear. They reached the cottage as darkness enveloped the valley. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Arjun added more logs, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread. But it was no use. The cottage, once a sanctuary, now felt oppressive, filled with an unseen presence. Part 5. The Trunk in the Attic. The following day, a sense of urgency filled Arjun. He was determined to find a way to help the lost spirit find peace. He remembered the old woman mentioning the attic. Perhaps there were clues to be found there. He convinced a hesitant Priya to join him. The attic was dusty and cobwebbed, filled with forgotten furniture and boxes. In the far corner, they discovered an old wooden trunk, its surface covered in faded velvet. Arjun struggled to open it, the hinges protesting with a loud groan. Inside, they found a collection of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon and a beautiful shawl embroidered with delicate flowers. Arjun carefully lifted the shawl. A mournful melody seemed to drift from its folds. He recognized the tune. It was the humming he had heard. Carefully, they examined the letters. They were love letters, penned by the heartbroken woman, each one filled with longing and despair. As they read, a wave of sadness washed over them. They understood her pain, her betrayal, her utter despair. Part 6. When the clock struck midnight. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, Arjun knew what he had to do. He gathered the letters and the shawl, and with Priya by his side, he returned to the attic. He placed the shawl on the floor and arranged the letters around it, as if the woman herself were being laid to rest. He lit a candle, the flame flickering in the stillness. "We hear you," Arjun said, his voice filled with compassion. "We understand your pain. We're here to help you find peace." Priya, her eyes filled with tears, added, "Your story touched our hearts. You don't have to suffer anymore." The wind seemed to sigh through the attic, stirring the dust motes dancing in the candlelight. The humming, which had been a constant presence, softened, becoming almost mournful, like a final lament. Arjun took Priya's hand, and together they recited a prayer, a message of peace and hope for the lost soul. As they finished, the candle flickered once, then went out, plunging the attic into darkness. The humming had stopped. Part 7. A promise kept, a spirit freed. A profound silence descended upon the attic. Arjun and Priya stood in the darkness, their hearts pounding. Then a new sound reached their ears, a gentle, ethereal melody filled with a sense of peace and tranquility they hadn't felt before. It was no longer the mournful humming of a heartbroken spirit, but something lighter, freer. Tears streamed down Priya's face. "She's free," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Arjun squeezed her hand, his heart filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. They'd helped the lost spirit find peace, finally allowing her to move on. As they descended from the attic, the cottage felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a sense of tranquility. The wind still whispered through the trees, but now it carried a hint of the gentle melody they had heard in the attic, a reminder of the spirit they had helped to set free. Part 8. Love Conquers All. That night, curled up together by the fire, Arjun and Priya felt a profound sense of closure. The cottage, once a place of fear and unease, now felt peaceful, almost sacred. They had come to celebrate their love, and in doing so, they had helped heal a heart broken long ago. As they gazed into the flames, they knew their anniversary would be one they would never forget. They had faced the unknown together, their love for each other a beacon in the darkness. And in the end, it was love, in all its forms, that had conquered all. The next morning, as they packed their bags, they took one last look at the cottage, its windows glowing in the morning light. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of the ethereal melody, a final farewell. Arjun and Priya smiled, knowing they would carry the memory of the haunted honeymoon and the peace they found within its walls forever in their hearts.